So the last thing I want to talk about is probably a story that's not on most of your radar, unless you live in Herzegovina. So right now there is a political crisis unfolding in Bosnia Herzegovina, and this political crisis comes from is kind of rooted in the system of government that they have. So let me start by outlining this. And by the way, Al Jazeera Start here uh, did a great analysis of this. I highly recommend you check it out. It is where I'm getting some of my information. So Bosnia Herzegovina has a tripartite leadership and governance structure. There are three presidents, one from each of the major ethnic groups: the Bosnians, the Serbs, and the Croats. Serbs and Croats not to be confused with Croatians and Serbians. Similar, not the same. Bosnians, you can figure that one out. So essentially, right now, the Serbian president has decided that he feels that Serbs are being treated. The Srpska president feels that Serbs are being treated unfairly, and has essentially decided that he's going to use his power to pull out of state institutions. And by the way, the state institutions are also kind of broken up along these ethnic lines to kind of make peace. So it's a very complicated system. But the reason that I'm talking about this, other than it's kind of an interesting tidbit in European politics, is that the reason that this whole system exists, and by the way, there's a part of the system that I haven't told you about yet. The whole reason this system exists is because it was put in place by the European Union after the fall of Yugoslavia. And the missing piece of this government that I have not yet told you about, which sits on top of the three presidents, is a viceroy. And the viceroy is not a Bosnian, is not a Serb, is not a Croat. It's a foreigner. So what is interesting about this is that you have a system that has been externally imposed on this nation, and you have the head of this government who is not a member of this nation, who is essentially deciding who stays and who goes and what happens, but is not living in there. Essentially, Bosnia-Herzegovina is like a European colony. In some sense, they're not really free. And it's not to say that multi-ethnic, multi-partite systems can exist. They do, and there isn't really a problem with them. Belgium is a great example. But the thing that's interesting is that you actually have to come to this agreement on your own, right? So, by the way, one of the reason that Yugoslavia fell apart was because the dictator that was keeping it together with an iron fist died, and then there was a power vacuum, and then people kind of fought however way they wanted, and it led to terrible wars and a genocide in Kosovo. So that obviously isn't the way to do it. But then you have external factors come in and say, hey, you nation Bosnia-Herzegovina, this is how you're going to run your show. And by exerting that external pressure and essentially creating a government from scratch, you're depriving the people of self-determinism. Now, self-determinism can be difficult, and oftentimes this is a conversation that puts the left in a weird place. On the one hand, we want peace and we want there to be stability in the nation. On the other hand, we want people to have their own. Institutions and states and things if they want them to have. Now these aren't particularly economic things, so there's class issues involved too, but we're not really going to get to them. Right now, we're just kind of talking about as a policy directive, does it make sense for these external bodies to create a government of people who don't necessarily want to live together? And I think what we're starting to see with Bosnia-Herzegovina is no. And by the way, we have seen this in the past. We just haven't seen this in Europe in a long time. So if you look at Africa, a lot of post-colonial states have had civil wars, revolutions, violent conflict, and sometimes genocide, because these nations were essentially scrapped together without allowing the groups of people who live within their modern borders to come to mutual understandings and agreements about who lives who's a part of what group, and what have you. Europe had the opportunity to do this, and thus the various tribes that were living in what is now France became the Gauls, and that became France over time. And same thing with Germany. They had a war, but they did all kind of come together and become Germany, the many principalities and Bavarian states. Many of these countries, and the most stable countries, actually have the opportunity to come to the conclusion of their stability on their own. And it's difficult with the Bosnia and Herzegovina situation because of the history of the region, and there's been so much violence there. But if you impose a system on them without allowing them to reach an agreement about how they want to live or where they want to live, if you impose that on them, you have taken away their ability to create that peace between them and their neighbors. And what you've done, instead of quelling tensions, is just buried them. And you don't know how long you've buried them for when you do the digging, right? But at some point, this system comes back to bite you. And I think we are seeing this in Europe for the first time in a long time, but this phenomenon isn't new. And I think it's really important now that those nations that want to be involved in the process, who want to mediate, should do just that, right? I think the position of viceroy and the tripartite government in Bosnia-Herzegovina is probably very flawed. I think there are real problems with having an external mediator within the government, that doesn't actually live there, right? I'm not decrying systems that have, an external, as it were, head of state who, fires the prime minister and brings on new prime ministers and stuff like that, like having a president and a prime minister. But, that system works because people elect the president, right? Like in France, for example. But if you have this system where distinct groups of people don't get the opportunity to decide for themselves, what system that they're going to meld with. By the way, this is like the other stories we covered today, right? It's all about political accountability. It's about self-determinism. It's about doubts in the system. If the system doesn't work for you, you start to question the system. If the system is consistent in not working for you, you seek ways to get rid of the system. And I think what's happening now is the Serb president is now looking for ways to game or get rid of the system because of grievances that he perceives. And no amount of external mediation is going to change that. Now, obviously, there should be external mediation to the point of peace, but as long as you can stop people from killing each other, that external mediation needs to take a step back and allow for people to vent their frustrations, to be angry with each other, to disagree, because when you do that, you allow for peaceful situations to arise naturally, and you actually build lasting peace. You build a situation where people are more likely to be peaceful for longer because they then don't have this suppressed anger and this suppressed frustration because of a deal that was made that they didn't have any part of. And it's not to say that that there aren't issues in countries that kind of got the opportunity to do this, but they are less violent and there are fewer of them. And I think that's great evidence to the point I'm making here.
Thanks for watching this video, guys. If you liked it, throw a like on it, share with your friends, and subscribe for more of our content. You can also find all of our videos and clips on youtube.com. Just search Let Them Eat Bread and you'll find all of our content. Alright guys, see you next time. Bye for now.